Hello and welcome to another episode of Area Control Bros, where we talk about area control mostly.
Mostly.
And this game is going to be even more mostly than usual as we go a little more
Yeah,
experimental
this
and freeform.
this is gonna be a Leslie episode.
Ah. It's not that we're running out of area control games to talk about. It's just that since we prefer to have played a game immediately and have it fresh before we talk about it, not that it's our first play, but it's just that we've played it recently and we haven't been able to play that many area control games this week. We decided to do something a bit different. So hopefully you enjoy.
Got to bring that top level content when it comes to the game video reviews.
Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't want to be like those played it once and just gave our first impressions type of reviews.
Yeah. If we did that, then I would have given Eclipse a much higher rating.
Yeah.
I was more
Right.
excited to play it after the first one.
Yeah, that thing was like milk. It came in tasting all right, but after a week sitting out on the counter, I don't know, man.
Well, I think a lot of games are like that, where like I think it's unusual for a game to have a lower rating than you give it later. I guess maybe the exception to that would be Forbidden Stars, where I think like even I gave it a lower rating mentally until I figured the game out more, and then it just kept growing and growing. I think Ben said in the Forbidden Stars episode even that until he broke his loss streak, he would have given it a lower score.
Yeah, I was as I recall, I had a very good win record on Forbidden Stars
You
before
were
we
you
knew
were
how to play
killing
it.
us.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
everybody figured out the game and it was like, damn it.
Blake, you were like the pioneer of the meta though. I was like I thought I knew how to play and Blake just killed us like 4 or 5 games in a row.
I
Yeah.
believe I've been surpassed in game knowledge though.
It took a long time,
I
but
started winning when we discovered the full extent of the rules, like when we learned that
Right.
combinating
That
didn't
was the
usually.
biggest nerf to me ever.
Yeah.
it was like Blake was like the economy Forbidden Stars gamer. And when we accidentally overbuffed the economy, it was like Blake was unstoppable.
Yeah, I really had that part figured out and it's changed a lot now
The
that we
double
play it right.
dominate on turn one.
Yep,
Yeah.
so funny.
All right,
Yeah.
so I think the first question we're going to talk about is I want to know your guys's worst board game experience that is mostly to do with the mechanics. We might also talk about like your worst board game experience, period, which might have to do with the people that you're playing with. I have a couple of those. Um, but I'm interested to hear what you guys think in terms of that, like when it's like, oh man, this is like the game is just not clicking right now.
Yeah.
I have a specific thing in mind, but I'll let you take first crack at it if you want, Blake.
I was just gonna rattle something off. Just the first thought that comes to mind for me is, I'm a big D&D disrespecter, and I hate how every single resolution in that game is a dice roll. I think if you're gonna make a game, you can have dice resolution, but don't make it every last thing. Sometimes let me like, draw a card, right? And sure, D&D, you've got a storytelling element, but um yeah, that always kind of frustrates me, because there's so many opportunities for things to go wrong.
Well, I think
Right.
as a play group, we don't love dice chucking. Not that we won't play a game if it has dice chucking, but rather that it's implemented
Well,
well.
I don't know. I think Ben's a dice respector.
I'm a dice respecter.
Ben
I
Ben
like a
respects dice.
dice I like a dice resolution system for one reason, which is that it's snappy. It can lower AP. If you have just like all of the pieces of the Rube Goldberg machine that you're setting up rely like if the end point is dice,
Right.
then you are like all of the stuff that you're thinking about is the Rube Goldberg machine before you throw the dice. And
Yeah,
then all of that thinking happens, and then you just like go, okay, well, now we're just it's up to chance. We're just rolling. I've done everything that I can. I don't
right.
mind that so much, like because it takes the burden off of thinking in the like moment where like sometimes you have a card system and it ends up being two people, thinking for a really long time about what they're gonna play. Like it adds a lot of AP when you get to that kind of rock, paper, scissory, some like resolution kind of system.
Yeah.
I think for me, I actually mind dice rolling less if it's like a co-op game. Like
Hmm.
Uprising,
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
the most dice chucky dice chucker I could think of in my collection, probably so much so that it has like a player aid for all the different types of dice you can be chucking, and that game it just kind of works because it's like I think it's part of it is there's so many things that are going on there. There's so many things that can go wrong, but like you're like going in expecting things to go wrong.
Yeah.
It's just kind of the game. It's like, oh no, everything's just ruined, but am I going to recover from this? But that's kind of what the game is like.
And
And
to kind of
Yeah.
bridge those two, like Uprising has the really quick resolution, but I think part of what makes it work for Uprising is that like you want to see what's going to happen, and I think D&D does do that. You get excited about certain roles, and in Uprising it's like, oh, all these two NPC enemies are going to fight, who's going to win, are they going to damage each other, then they're going
but
to
see,
not,
that's the
or
perfect
you're
type
in
of
the fight or whatever.
dice chunking where there's zero stakes because it's like you just want to see them kill each other.
Right, there's like a it's like a sitting on the sideline
Yeah, we're
watching
just
a
in the
fist
peanut
fight.
gallery.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
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 Oh,
That was I was about to bring that up. I love that about Uprising, where you're just like, okay, here we go. Everything's good. Like we're
but
all winning.
we haven't talked about it on the podcast at all. We might have briefly mentioned it in reference to how heavy it is, but Ben and I played Aeon Trespass Odyssey, and that game definitely has dice, and they are
Yeah.
chucked. And I remember in the shelf side review of ATO, which I didn't entirely agree with, but they do very good reviews in general, and I think they did have some good points in the review. But one thing they said was the one thing they didn't like was that they didn't like that the combat system was so carefully considered and balanced and complicated, but that it all came down to dice for like certain parts of the combat, like actually landing the hit. And I think that the kind of game it is can only really be with dice. Like I understand why they arrived at dice after probably going through multiple iterations of that combat. And it's because you have to be afraid, you know?
Yeah.
I think you have to be afraid in that system of things going wrong. And there has to be a very real chance that your characters die and that, you lose titans and things. And
Right.
like there are going to be times in combat where you do everything right and like things still go wrong. And that knowledge that that can happen will haunt you whenever you're playing the game because you'll think like
Mm.
it might not matter. I might still get owned in this round or something. And like I think that not every person wants to be playing a game where that can happen. And I totally 100% get that. And I feel that way in PvP games. Like I would hate for that to be the case in like a 4X game or like an area control game for me to do everything right genuinely, not just me coping, and for me to be somehow punished for it. But ATO is trying to be thematic. It's like there's all these like forces at play with like fate and like these beings that are like way over your caliber you're having to battle. And so there's no good way to simulate you being overmatched, but that the odds are literally against you. So that when
Mm.
you overcome them, it's like, oh my God, we did it. You know,
Yeah.
it's like we actually pulled it
Yeah.
out. And there's like a sense of accomplishment that you not only had to know how the system works, and it's a very complicated system in that game. It's like we talked about. I think it's the heaviest game we played. But you also have to have like thought about how to mitigate chance in various ways, and knowing that the dice are involved. And there's ways to deal with the dice. It's not just like raw dice trucking. Um, but it's like controlling for all these elements and still coming out ahead feels great. Like you feel like you actually did something that was worth accomplishing. And
Mm.
in that sense, I think like there is a place for dice in some systems, I guess is the point I was making. And I think ATO is fine with it's like a fine implementation of dice
Yeah.
and uprising as well. But I think what's in common between those two games and why they both work is in both games you're supposed to be up against these big bads that are like they're way more threatening than you. like the dice are simulating the fact that like it's the Rebel Alliance versus like the Galactic Empire type of thing. Like you got to roll the dice and hope that shot goes into the exhaust port type of thing.
Hmm, right.
And
And
dice
I
are good
like
for that.
those sorts of roles in D&D. I like when it's a big like combat or like a very pivotal moment, but when it's like, oh, try to talk to this guy, right? Then you roll for it, and it's like, oh, this is like the same exact resolution system as fighting like the Necro Lord that we've been like hunting. What's going on here? It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense to me. It
Yeah,
takes away some of the fun of the other dice throws, the ones that
they
I want to be epic.
and that's something that's like a bit of a problem with tabletop RPGs because your mileage totally varies depending on who's the DM. Because there's like
Mm,
plenty of people in that space who would say like, oh, and there's like a lot of philosophy there where it's if the role has no stakes, then don't make them roll, you know? And
yeah,
and and sometimes it's like you get a DM who's I like roll for everything. And then there's sometimes where it's like, just you don't need a role for that. Like you just do it. And social encounters are like one of the hardest things to design in terms of like the RPG space because it's
right.
like you want there to be some wiggle room for like, well, if in real life the player is bad at talking but wants to play a character that's good at talking, you shouldn't like punish them for that because like it's like it doesn't work that way for other
Right.
like skill checks. You don't if you're
Yeah,
playing
you
it's
can
like
increase your charisma as much as you want. You've got a natural cap of 12.
right. Like if
Yeah.
you're like playing the strength guy, you don't have to go physically prove that you can lift something. So there needs to be some kind of gamified element with, oh, you can roll to socialize with somebody. But I don't know. Part of it is also like you're just trying to enjoy your friends
Right. I would
at
almost
the
rather
D&D
play
table.
like an endless winter style mini game to like resolve the, the speech check. Like, okay, now you got to do your dinosaur set collection. Now you got to.
You
Oh, there's
gotta
fishing. There's fishing.
you gotta
Yeah.
accumulate cool points. You
Right.
gotta, yeah.
Honestly, I forget that game exists every single time until you mention it.
Yeah.
And then
It's
like
such good meme
and
value
then it
though.
all like rushes back and then like 10 minutes later, whoosh, it's all
Oh,
gone
by
again.
the way, Will, what's your answer to Ben's question?
Yeah.
And tell us why it's
Oh,
endless winter.
yeah, I guess we got dragged into a well, it's interesting because I mean, I don't consider that my worst experience because the whole time we played that horrible Endless Winter play, I was thinking like I brought this on myself because I brought it up to you, remember?
In theory, it was like doing Imperium so good, it's got all the same mechanics. Lost
I think
Ruins of Arnak,
that was one of the
Endless
worst
Winter.
burns ever. I remember back then I was a little bit, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, was it like a year and a half ago? I feel like back then I was like paying a little closer attention to like the BGG hotness.
Right,
And like I think I realized that was like the one moment of capitulation where I just gave up trying to be like trend chasing. And I was like, you know what? Like people are gonna like what they're gonna like. I don't like this at all. And like it can be in the hotness and I just don't care. Like it's not doesn't mean like I sometimes I'll look at it and be like, oh, like that's an upcoming game. Maybe it's like a crowd-funded game or like something that hit retail and I might go check it out. But I think obviously it's a logical fallacy to assume that because something is popular, it's good. But in this case, I think you kind of have this feeling that in the board game community, that if something's like in the hotness, it must be collectively thought of as being like good enough to merit attention or something, but it's just so
right.
not the case. Like it's just anything can be in the hotness, and
There's too large a diversity of preference in the board game community to use the hotness list as
yes,
a good way to determine what game you're going to play next.
Also, how
absolutely.
many people are just giving it a good rating before they get their Kickstarter bundle because
Oh
they
yeah,
backed
it's
it for
got
like
the
That was
$300?
another
massive
thing. That is
You
another
know?
thing.
Kickstarter
Yeah,
boost.
like whenever a
Yeah.
game is delivered from crowdfunding, it'll like go into the hotness as people just rush to give it all like nines and tens or whatever. And but anyway, this isn't actually my worst experience with gaming. I think my worst experience with gaming was actually not with you guys because I like both of you guys, and I think if you were both there, I wouldn't have had such a bad experience.
Right, it would have been bearable, the
It would have been
terrible
bearable. But the
mechanics.
worst experience I've ever had playing a board game ever was actually at the meetup of the LGS, whose name I will not mention, but you guys know. Um, without you guys there, we were playing Star Wars Outer Rim. And for listeners or watchers who don't know what Star Wars Outer Rim is, it's a it's like a what's it called again? Sandbox game. And I don't inherently hate these kinds of games, and it was actually my copy of the game. I played it with my wife, and we enjoyed it as a two-player game. And I don't think I realized how much downtime there is when you have more than two players in this game,
Mm,
and especially with people who have AP. Because I think the biggest cause of AP is a bigger decision space. Like I think we spoke about previously on the podcast how like we all like Huang, but that there's a real downside that if you're playing with people with AP, because the decision space is so immense, people could take a long time to figure out what they're going to do. They can do so many different things. And in a
right.
sandbox game, it's kind of like that. You can just go do whatever. You can drive your starship wherever you want, do quests and do all sorts of things. And there's a race to get to the most VP, but you can get to that VP in whatever method you choose. And so it's actually I like the concept of the game, and I like playing it at two players when my wife wants to, because it's like a chill, laid back thing you do while putting like the Star Wars OST on in the background or something.
Yeah.
Um, but playing it with random people at a five-player count, which I think was max player count, it was either four or five. The downtime was so big. It was like 25 minutes or something.
Wait, between
Wow,
each
between
turn that you
turn?
took?
Like if I ended my turn, it was like 25 minutes before it came back to me. And
Jeez.
like
25 minutes? Wait. How bad was the AP?
there was one guy there with particularly bad AP, but then there was one person there who had like maybe moderate AP,
Yeah,
and the other person was actually a younger player, I think a teenager, who was actually taking their turns pretty quickly. And then I knew how to play the game, so I was taking my turns quickly as well. And
right.
so for it to go through those people back to me was about around 25 minutes on average.
Wow.
And like, but the crucial thing is that those 25 minutes contained like nothing I care about. Like
Mm,
it wasn't going to be stuff that impacted me. There was a mechanic where like you could do like a heist with somebody else and like ask them to help and like contribute dice to them rolling for stuff. Occasionally that came up, but usually nothing happened. And so this game stretched for like the entire length of that meetup, and I just left afterwards. It was like, from noon to 4. And
jeez.
like one of the guys had to leave. We didn't even finish the game. He was just like, "Oh, I gotta go, man. This is taking forever." And I was like, "Yeah, I feel that." And after he left, I just like put the game away. I mean, we didn't even finish the game. And I was like, "What the hell did I just spend my last 4 hours doing?" And it wasn't like anybody was even being rude. Like nobody was being like a really bad sport about it. It was just so like boring.
Mm,
And like I had only played it at two-player before, so I had no idea like what I was subjecting these people to, and maybe that's what made it worse, is because like I think when I was putting the game on the table, I didn't know what I was going to be subjecting people to. And it was just so boring. And like I had to be also like kind of running the game a little bit and like being the rules lawyer, because I was the guy who taught the game. And so I could never just be like on my phone between turns. I kind of had to like make sure. And so it was that awful sweet spot of like I am I am
uh,
like super not engaged in what's going on right now, but I also can't just like fall asleep because people are asking me rules questions. And so
mm,
I'm at that perfect like awful amount of engagement. It's like I forget there's people talk about it. It's like the amount of engagement you need to be when like you're waiting in line and like the line is moving like once every minute and a half or something. And so it's like you have just enough time to be like in line and really bored. But like if you're looking at your phone or like trying to read a book, there's just not enough time to get engaged in either thing because you got to move in the line a little bit, you know? And
Yeah.
yeah.
it's just miserable. It was like that. And I don't even think it's a bad game. I just don't play it above two-player kind, I guess. But gosh, it was just awful. It
Yeah,
was
it's funny you put it that way. That's exactly how I feel about trying to read in rush hour traffic. You know what I mean? That's why I've stopped doing it. No,
there.
no, that's fun though. I mean, I can't believe 25 minutes in between the turns. That is so long. I would have been miserable as well. Um,
Man, yeah.
I don't think I've played that one. What'd you say it was? Star Wars Outer Rim? Is that the one with all the little fighter pilots that have different maneuvers or whatever?
That's X-Wing. You can play,
Oh,
and I
okay,
think
right.
X-Wing got discontinued, and now they redid it as like Armada or something.
Oh, okay. Hmm.
But I haven't played either game. I just that's what I've heard. I think Outer Rim is like you can play as Han Solo or Lando or Boba Fett, like all like the bounty hunters and mercenaries of the setting.
You know,
And
le yeah. Sorry, legitimately, this is reminding me of Warhammer 40K. I don't know if you've ever played the like tabletop, but like that game does I find have a similar problem where the other person's turn is just 25 minutes of oh, they're just blowing up all of my stuff and there's nothing I can do. Um it's like it's just this 25 minutes of grueling like oh man, they blew up my cool model that I spent 6 hours painting. And now I don't get to use it. I didn't get to use that at all. And
They
that's
had to
such a
paint it for the team buff, you know?
right, yeah. Well, and then you end up it's like whoever's first player, you end up like removing some of like the other person's models before they even get to use any of them. Because you take like an entire 6 phases or something of that game of Warhammer 40K before your opponent gets to do basically anything. I don't know if that was the ninth edition problem. I know they're on the 10th. And I'm not even like a big Warhammer disrespecter. I enjoyed it well enough when I played it, but this is reminding me of how that made me feel sometimes, which was, oh, and at least in that game, I'm engaged for the my turn for like the 30 minutes I'm doing stuff, but it is a two-player game that has a similar thing.
Yeah, that's a lot of downtime.
I mean, I
There,
feel like continuous turns is the way of the future, right?
oh
Like
Yeah,
yeah.
do a little bit, then move on. Yeah.
we've seen almost every game that we play with continuous turns. It just feels so nice in
Yeah.
comparison. Anyway,
It's
sorry
good
to interrupt you,
stuff.
Blake. I think you're about to say something.
Oh, I might have been, but I was interested in what you had to say about the continuous turn thing, so I lost my thought.
Oh, sorry.
No,
It's
no,
got
not at all. Not at all.
gone forever now.
It's true though, the continuous turn stuff. What the biggest examples we have, I thought it was interesting. We were talking about this before. You had mentioned this point on one of the previous podcast episodes about the continuous turns, and you brought up dominant species. And when I think continuous turns, I'm thinking, okay, Dwellings of Eldervale and now Andromeda's Edge, but Dwellings of Eldervale where people can be on very different turn phases in Dwellings of Eldervale, right? One person might be recalling this turn, and one other person might have put out two guys, and they have three more to do before they recall, right? They're about as far as they can be from that step. And then you're just passing back and forth, right? You're still taking a turn and passing it, but people are in different like turn phases, and that was kind of how I had conceptualized this continuous turn idea.
I think
And
I think
with
when I
dominant
mentioned
species, I don't think that's the case necessarily. So I'm just curious what.
yeah, I think I mentioned I believe I if I'm remembering correctly, I think I mentioned it was like continuous turn structure and a dominant species, not like continuous turn structure including dominant species.
I see. But
And
because it does have a similar vibe, dominant species. It's so
it's
smooth the way the game plays in
yeah,
that
yeah. I
phase
mean,
of resolution.
I think I was bringing it up because I think it's an example of like it doesn't have to be continuous turn order to sort of keep people engaged in a way that I think we all enjoy. And dominant species proved you don't have to do it that way for that to
Right.
work. Um, and I think that the reason why dominant species works is because you have a worker placement essentially phase. And I think this is something that I think we all really like, which is the sort of very thinky preparation phase of a board game. Dominant
Yeah,
Species has that in common with like Forbidden Stars, where it's like the phase where you're putting the tokens down on Forbidden Stars face down. And in Dominant Species, it's like putting your workers down. And it's really, really, really tense because you want to do like 10 different things and you've got like 4 or 5 workers, like little cylinders you can put down. And not only that, you got to worry about what everybody else is taking. And it's not really like a worker placement game in feel because in a worker placement game, oftentimes it's like, oh, I got to make my barrel. I need wood, I need screws, and I need iron or whatever. And so you're off doing that. Somebody else, you're making barrels. The other guy's making beer. He needs the wheat and the barley, whatever. Anyway, you might
yeah,
not be directly competing, but in dominant species, like the spaces that are good are like good for everybody. They're hotly contested. And so
yeah,
like I think everybody's really thinking like, oh man, if he goes there, I have to completely change my strategy. And because, getting in line in the glaciation spot, stuff like that is so important. And I mean, Blake has done the getting putting yourself in line in glaciation multiple turns in advance and losing a
yeah.
worker in the process, but just to lock it down.
Sometimes
Uh,
it's the play. Ah, dude, dominant species is so fun.
but
I,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
I do think that there's a big similarity in the feeling there between dominant species and forbidden stars in terms of having the phases broken down like that, and the flipping up of the hidden orders in forbidden stars feels sort of like the resolution
Yeah,
phase in dominant species. But what I think feels even more like that phase is battle for Rakugan, and it's just because of the speed, right? Because with
yes.
forbidden stars you might stop and have you know I guess it is kind of the same thing with dominant species, though. You do stop and have people doing actions throughout of it, but
Yeah, I
most of
was
them are
gonna
pretty
say, I mean,
quick, you
because
know?
like if you're doing like a move action in dominant species, I don't remember what the name is because like all the actions in dominant
Hmm.
species have.
Migrate.
Is it migrate?
Right,
Yeah.
I think it's
migrate.
migration, yeah.
It's like doing an advanced order in Forbidden Stars because like you still have to
Yeah,
like you don't have to choose how you're migrating until the
right.
migration is being resolved.
But importantly, I don't think anything really approaches the like time take that a battle in Forbidden Stars does,
No,
you
no,
know?
no, no. I mean, I guess that yeah, I completely agree. It's just that like it's not simultaneously resolved like in Rakugan, but the overall resolution in dominant species, you kind of just you go through it really quick. And there might be a few things that take longer than others if somebody's deliberating, but you kind of you go right through it. It's just the game's really smooth.
Yeah, and usually the deliberation in that game is, well, how do I hurt the most people? It's usually stuff that other people are kind of invested in. It's like, oh, I'm gonna blow which of these tiles am I gonna kill everyone on? And then who am I going to kill adjacent to the tile, you know? And you're just kind of usually dishing out like it's like, well, I think I'm just gonna hurt everybody a little bit, or that guy needs to be taken care of in particular, or oh, nothing personal, kid. This is just the best move for me. So
Yeah.
all of your guys are gonna die here.
Yeah, it's like it gets slowed down because people will start begging on their knees for their lives in dominant species. Like, oh no, please don't. I have a wife and kids. My birds have not evolved yet. They're just like little baby chickens, And then as they're mercilessly wiped out by an unending tide of spiders or whatever. But it is one of those things where like I don't mind if the game slows down because of like table talk in that kind of context because like that's fun. It's going to be fun to go into that part of the game.
Yeah,
So I don't really mind that. But anyway, yeah. Long story short, I think it's just dominant species is just an example of a game design that I think handles turn structure very well. And I think turn structure in general is something that we talked about it and the actually I think we might have forgotten to bring it up in the Komet episode, but the Komet, in addition to fixing so many other issues, also fixed like the turn order issue by letting you kind of determine turn order at the end of every round for the new round.
mm,
And Fractured Sky does have that a little bit as well. So actually, both of those games do have a way to cope with
right.
that. And I think that whenever I see a game that doesn't have that as part of the consideration of the design, it kind of makes me disappointed in the designers because I think it's like not something you can hand wave and ignore. And I love it when I see creative ways of getting around it. And I think the Comet wave doing it's great. Fractured Sky wave doing it is great. I like that part of the game where you like there is the kind of push and pull of like, do I want to win ties? Do I want to get the extra resource? Do I want to just see what people
Yeah.
are doing? You know, there's like a nice decision
And
space there.
and again, dominant species has a great way of doing it where in order to advance your position on the turn order, you have to essentially elect to place your cylinder last, which, okay, there's probably not going to be as many good spots. Some advantage to it too, right? You get to see where everybody else is going. Um, but yeah, I mean, I love when a game has a little bit of something like that. It's cool to see. I think Ben had a few turns. He ended early on our last play of Fractured Sky so that he could get the tie break the next round and how important that is, right? But it really sucks to end your turn early. So, you got to make use of it. And I think he did. It's
Yeah, I
kind of
think I
cool.
won like 1 or 2 points just on the tiebreak. It might have been one, but I mean, one is enough in
Right.
the
And
way that
and
we
even where
play,
maybe it didn't, even if it only won you one or two, which is a
Yeah.
lot, right? We especially with our house rule taking out that top row objectives, there's not very many to go around. Um, it's still oh, have I lost my thought?
It's still a lot as a percentage. It's like, might be like 20% of your end score or something.
Yeah.
Right.
I should probably mention my worst board game experience because
Yeah.
of I'm a
Oh
kid.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So it's very much a lighter game than what you guys have brought up, but I don't know if you've ever heard of Slamwich. Um it was given to me for my birthday and it is a game for children. But I
Wait, I remember this.
Yeah, you played Sandwich with me. But so it's one of those games where you pull out cards and then everybody's supposed to like hit the card and then whoever like hits last gets the stack or doesn't get the stack. I don't remember what the exact rules are. But the point being was Slamwich is a terrible game for adults and children alike, I believe. There's even a optional, and not even like, there's even a suggestion in the rule book, which is if this game goes too long, you might want to just like call it there and then declare a winner. And I remember when we played, it was just, it ended up with just two people who kept trading a stack back and forth and it felt like it could go on forever. It ended up becoming it's this game that felt like it's supposed to be a sprint that ended up being a marathon because it
Hmm.
was more about who could be like less exhausted by the end of it and still be like slapping the pile or whatever. It lasted like 40 minutes, which this game is not supposed, it's like not a game that you want to last that long. It's a game
Oh
where you're
no.
slapping cards?
Right. That is so funny. I had forgotten about that completely, but it's true. That game was terrible. And there's some small box games that are great, but that one was bad, bro.
Right. And it's like I think there's probably games that do that same concept better of just like hitting a stack of cards. I think you probably there's definitely games that do that in a way that is, good for kids, right? But it's like
Right.
I cannot foresee a group of children. I work with kids. I cannot foresee a group of children ever deciding, okay, well, let's just like set a timer and then count however many cards somebody has and whoever has the like least wins. It's like they put that in the book so that the parent could just be like, okay, it's enough. We're done. Like, we're not playing anymore.
Man,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Blake.
I just wanted to say I've thought a little bit, well, you know what, Will? Mine's a totally new topic. Are you commenting on what Ben had to say?
I am, in fact, commenting on what Ben had to say. So don't lose your train of thought, though.
I've
I don't
got
want
it
to I
still,
don't want to
yeah.
see you lose another one. I was already responsible for one loss. Um, the I was just gonna say I think that the idea of like games for kids, I feel like is a topic all its own, right? And Um, I this is like maybe a little too much information, but I grew up in like a household that was essentially like I grew up with my dad at first, and so I was like in a single dad household, and my dad like didn't play like kids games with me. He played like grown up games with me.
Yeah,
And like we did Legos and stuff, but like if we played a board game, we'd play like an actual board game. And I do maybe I so my point is maybe I'm a little biased, but like I feel like if and when I do have a kid, I'm just gonna teach them like El Grande, you
right.
know?
Yeah, there are there
I'm
are
not
really
gonna
good games that aren't like terribly complex.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean it's just like and not to be the kind of person who's like, yeah, just play like Mozart to your kid while he's in the womb or she's in the womb. Like but like seriously, I mean you could teach them a game that's gonna let them develop better and like develop strategy and like think about things long term. And I think it's going to be better for them, like for their personal growth, to be able to
Yeah.
like play certain games that aren't just like slapping a deck of cards, and like
I mean,
again,
if there were a 12-year-old that could beat me at El Grande, I'd hire him, you know?
that's what I mean is it's like I mean some of these I mean we do but this is like we play we're in the hobby for fun, but like you are developing like intellectual skills by becoming good at some of these games. And
Yeah.
I think if it's like your own blood, maybe you're more concerned about that kind of thing. Like, I want them to grow up and be able to think long term or strategically, or I want them to value the Castillo, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's a different value. I want them to be fast. I want the reaction speed to be,
That's
you
true.
know.
Yeah, I guess that's another line of logic, which is going the full on dexterity mode. But I
Yeah.
mean, that's what Crokinol's for, right?
Oh yeah. Area control,
True,
Crokinole.
true, true.
The thing I was going to say, I have not lost it, and not to move on too quickly from your point, Will, because I did enjoy that. But the thing I was going to say is that I've thought more about my answer because I just spit one out just to be the first to say something, whatever. Um, Ben was here with me when this happened. Me and Ben together were trying to get into doing more board games. We went to a meetup, and I think this might have been the first time we went to this one. And I had bought Camel Up recently, and there was another person there who had brought like 15 games, one of those guys, and one of them was Camel Up, and he talked about how much he loved the game, and I was like, I want to be part of the table that plays Camel Up because we had so many people we had to split up, and Ben joined me, and it turned out this guy did not know the rules to Camel Up, and he taught the game because he was talking like, "Oh yeah, I've played this a million times, like I love this game." He did not know the rules, and the most important, I had to convince him on a few of them, but I had to, out of politeness, give up on that at some point because he was a bit stubborn, and there was an important rule about the when you score the betting tickets that he did not understand and taught wrong, and we played wrong, and it made the game terrible, even worse than it you know like it took any amount of strategy out of it than it otherwise would have been, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, it was
terrible.
more or less just completely random.
It was
Yeah.
pretty dumb.
Well, anyway, I think that there is something else that we could talk about, which is that something else that comes up in a lot of these episodes, just because it's part of area control games, is what makes a combat system in an area control game good. And I suppose good is used in the loosest possible way here, where good can mean satisfying, quick, satisfyingly slow, or something in between, but just depends on the game.
Good could mean painful if that's the feeling that combat is supposed to evoke, you know? If it's
Yeah.
supposed to be grueling and awful and you want to avoid it, that can serve a purpose, you know?
It can. I like the same just as a base level. Like, what does it have to do? I want to see a combat that is meaningful, right? I care about the outcome, but the result isn't gonna make it so I either can or can't play the game going forward, right? I don't want a combat that by the time it's done, I'm saying, okay, well, now I'm held hostage the rest of this game because I've had my one fleet defeated,
Yeah, I'm cooked.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a few ways to stop that. Maybe you allow for retreats, and it's impactful enough that you lose, one unit, which is certainly true in some games with a tight enough economy. Um, or perhaps you make it so that you have so much of an economy that losing one fleet is okay because you're going to build them right back up. I think both of those actually, even though they're kind of outside of combat considerations, really influence what I want the combat to result in, just in terms of the stakes.
Yeah. Well, and stakes are another big thing too. You want the I like a combat system that is quick enough that other players that aren't involved don't get bored. And I think that's the more important part of that segment is if you can have combats that are meaningful for everybody involved, where everybody is interested in the outcome of what's going to happen,
Yeah,
then that's always good. Because then everybody's engaged when it's even if it's not their turn, because it's like, oh well, if it goes one way or another, then it really is going to impact me. I think TI has some of those where I'm not necessarily caring too much about the dice checking that's going on, but it's going to really impact the political landscape, if one of these fleets dies, right?
yeah,
And
Honestly,
they're locked down.
honestly, that last play of TI we had like 2 weeks ago, after the episode where we talked about TI, it like soured me a little bit, even though I even though I won. Um, and even though we had that cool final round, because I think that final round with the public objective, what happened was I had taken politics in the round before what was likely the last round, which is what you should always do if you think that's what's going to happen. Ironically, I mean, I hadn't taken it before that. What was I, like third or fourth, and I still got to take politics? It might have come all the way around to me, and I got
I
politics.
thought I thought you might have even gotten like you're kind of high in the order.
I think I was
Apparently,
three. I think it might have been
yeah,
you actually that was the speaker, and you
yeah.
were you were two seats to the right of me. But anyway, um we were able to make a secret objective that you can score in the action phase, a public objective, so everybody could score it, and that made the game so much better that it really got me thinking about this continuous turns thing that we brought up earlier, and it got me thinking not just about that, but like about um like ways you could make not maybe not just make TI a better game, but just like stuff that you would take into consideration if you were designing like a new Space 4X epic negotiation game. Like, maybe TI is fine the way it is, and TI is TI, and like it can just be the way it is. But it did get me thinking about like what I would want TI to be. Like if I designed my, 4+ hour Space 4X game, what would it have? And it would have more stuff like that. It would have more
Yeah.
things that can be done right away. There would not be an agenda phase. These sorts of things would just happen naturally as the result of playing the game. And I might have some sort of deck that, and this actually, we'll probably talk about it in a little bit, but Andromeda's Edge, we just got in one play of it, and it, it sniped the TI agenda thing a little bit, where you can sort of get to peek at the top two events cards of the deck, and you can keep things on top or bottom them, and but what causes them to occur isn't like a discrete agenda phase. What causes them to occur is just people playing the game and kind of going up on tracks and stuff. And once
yeah,
enough of those things have happened, you hit a point where boom, now it happens. And I was thinking like TI is kind of designed from the ground up with like those kinds of with like the agenda phase being discrete. And so it's you can't really house rule that kind of thing in. You can't change TI. It's like all balanced a certain way. But it just makes me think that like not just continuous turn structure for like player turns, but also even things like agenda phase. might be more interesting if it were something that could happen like in the middle of a round or like the middle of just the turns that are continuous. And maybe it's advantageous for you to trigger it right now because you know you can take advantage of it now. And maybe there's some sort of decision-making process there that allows you to score now versus later. And we don't have an opinion on Andromeda's Edge, I think. I don't know about you, Blake, but like we need to get in like several more plays of it, or at least three or four.
Yeah, I'm
But
I'm really curious to see how it feels at 3 or even 4 if it happens that way.
but
And
that
I'm
but
sure we'll play it at 3 and I'm excited for that. Yeah.
but that specific idea really got me kind of thinking back to like the TI thing I was thinking about. And I think that also comes into play with combat. As Ben said, you don't want people to be wasting a whole lot of time on combat when it doesn't involve you. I think games like Inish are great because like the combat that does happen might involve everybody. You know,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
you you have a fight in the middle of the board, maybe everybody's kind of involved, or they can at
And
least make
and you're definitely interested because it's a pretty tight board. So even if you're not involved, you're sitting there rubbing your hands together like, oh, am I going to be able to clean up the scraps, you know?
yeah,
Like there's always a little bit of fun to be had in Inish.
yeah.
Um,
I do think it
I
come. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
Oh yeah, I was going to say I think it's important to mention that the objective that got elected in that TI game was basically attack like win a combat against whoever has the most victory points,
Yes,
which I liked a lot
it
as
was really cool.
a kind of a catch-up mechanic because
Yeah.
it made this weird thing where it was, everybody was kind of like dogpiling onto one person, but then, like if you shoot ahead, then you're the guy to go beat up, and then everybody else kind of shoots up ahead. It was a tight enough pack that that happened like 3 times, where it was like there was two people who were in contention. Then one guy, and I was one of them. Then I got attacked, and that guy was also one that you could attack because everybody, like all three of us, were tied. Then I attacked him, and then I was the only person that people could score against. I don't know. It ended up being this interesting chasing the leader kind of situation.
Right. Which is always so fun in games, right? Like that's one thing that I think is fun in Comet, for example. So to have that naturally come about in Twilight Imperium, I mean, it would probably get me thinking too that.
It was cool, and usually TI is a game where it's the opposite. Nobody wants to be the one who's doing stuff. You want to be the guy who's doing nothing until everybody else is done, and then you do your stuff. And that's just how you play the game most of the time, unless they're
But there's a little bit of fun to be had with making people think that you're doing all the stuff that you can do when really you're
yes,
holding back, right?
that's
There's
that's
some fun there.
that's ideal. And I just don't think that like the game of TI is benefited by the fact that like the meta is basically stalling. And so having something occur to make people that much more active made the game so much better for me in particular. And of course, I'm biased. It's me. It's just my opinion. Some people might like the fact that you stall out, and obviously I know how to stall. I know how to play the game, but that doesn't mean I love doing it. I think soft passing in Inish, just to go back to Inish, is like so much it's a way more interesting stall because it's like you're gambling kind of. In TI, like when you pass, you're not technically passing. You're kind of like, oh, I'm just gonna like move a ship here, or I'm gonna play
Right.
this card that's like a component action.
Yeah.
But the
Burning
soft,
cards, burning actions you've
yeah,
been
but
saving up. Yeah.
but an Inish like the soft pass, which is like the you got to do something or the turn's over. The whole round's over if you don't do
Right.
something now. That is so much cooler. I mean,
And
man,
even less those stakes, right? There are times where you'll be at a table and you might ask, well, does Inish get ruined then if you have one person who is completely unwilling to pass in order to punish people? Because that's not uncommon. People have a handful of cards, they've made this plan during the drafting phase, they want to play out their plan. And no, I have no fault with that. No problem with that. But the game is like quick enough, and there are situations that will arise that require you to address them immediately throughout your turn, that your plans are going to change. You're going to be forced to not stall the whole time. You can't do a soft pass every turn in Inish. And if you do, then it's a very quick game. And I think it works in that regard.
and somebody was telling me that not on our play group, but somebody I was talking to. I've never played Inish with this person, but they were just talking about it. And they said that they'd like Inish more if there wasn't this like super agonizingly long end game. And I said like, well, how like long is the end game taking in Inish? It can't be taking longer than like 10 or 20 minutes, right? And they're like, no, it's like a 2 hour game every single time. And I was like, man, I haven't had a game.
We need a king, my friend.
I was like,
You just
first of all,
download the PDF.
yeah, I mean, first of all, that, but like even without that, I mean, when's the last time we had a game of Inish that lasted longer than like an hour? You know,
I don't know. I don't think it's uncommon for it to go longer than that, but it can go so quick. And
not, yeah,
you can avoid the 2.5+ hour games by just having I need a king. Even if you have someone with like, really bad AP and maybe you're even playing with five with the expansion, I think you could knock it out in 2.5 hours as long as you got the module on.
I do think that it's like, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I think the more experienced the group is at Inish, I think the game is actually just faster, like in terms of
Yeah.
actual game length, because people know how to win through the interaction that's coming. They know how to like, or at least create a strong play that could win more consistently. And I
Yeah.
think like in TI, the more experienced the group is, it's like the longer it goes because everybody knows how important it is to stall.
Yeah.
And I guess I just like I like being rewarded for being proactive. And even the soft pass in Inish is proactive because you're trying to force someone to do something, right? It's not like it's the important part isn't that you're not doing something, although by soft passing you might be speeding up the game. Um, but rather that you are forcing the issue and not letting it be prolonged.
Right.
Eh,
It's sort of like saying, look, the impetus for action is on you, my friend. I'm happy with my position in this aisle.
Yeah.
And if you're right about that, then presumably the opponent will play. And that is kind of a fun, thing to have to call.
To circle back to the original question, a little bit away from the topic currently, I do think a good combat system needs to balance randomness and a feeling of control.
Mhm.
There needs to be some amount of randomness in whatever combat system you have, I believe, unless you're just playing like chess. Um, but in an area like in these systems, there has to be an amount of randomness that you can also put your fingers on the scales a little bit,
Mm.
and feel that somebody has an advantage over one of the others. And I was actually designing a card system. I was trying to, inspired by the idea that inspired by the game round that we had of TI, and I was trying to model it almost based on like a rock, paper, scissorsy kind of thing. And I played it out with myself, and it's like, well, the problem is that it feels random, and I don't feel like I have like an impact or like a read on what the other person is gonna do. Um, and it was an interesting exercise for me to try to design a combat system because it was like, well, there needs to be a certain amount of like my ability to change this outcome. Like I need to have some sense of control, whether that be through like a deck building or something like that. Like I need to be able to influence this. But it also does need to be a little bit of a toss up. Somewhat like it can't be a complete blowout every time.
Right.
Like there has to be some amount of, well, there's a some universe like 1 in a million shot where I can like win this combat. Maybe that's not necessary, but maybe that's what I like in a system is that like, you might have a slim chance, but you at least have a chance.
I've
I
been think Oh, sorry, go ahead, Blake.
I was just gonna say I agree with the caveat that I think it's okay to disconnect the randomness of the resolution from the resolution like timing itself. For example, if you have something that the battle is going to be deterministic, but it's done by cards, and your hand, and you've drawn a random hand, and your opponent has drawn a random hand, and you're going to play out your cards, and the battle would go the same way every time if you have that same hand of cards, right? Well, it's okay. We have this randomness element because the opponent has drawn a hand of cards, I've drawn the hand of cards, and our hands are unknown to each other. So it might as well be saying that we drew or got the the random dice roll or whatever at that moment, right?
I also think this is the origin of a mechanic that Will has personally dislikes, which is the action card deck or what have you. You know, like the outside deck that you can use to influence like a combat. Because that's a way to put your finger on the scale a little bit to go, well, ooh, I've got this little card that might be able to help me jimmy it in this like one specific situation, you know?
What have you got for +4 swords? Little
Yeah,
Dune
I
Imperium.
okay. So let me just let me speak up. So two things. One is I am the naysayer for action cards. However,
Mm.
I do recognize they're necessary. And I think when we talked about Inish, I said that like even though I don't love this mechanic, it's like best implemented in this game. But we were playing Andromeda's Edge to go back because it's just what we played this past Sunday. Um, I didn't hate it as much in Andromeda's Edge in our first play, and the reason was is we were whipping through that damn deck so fast.
Right. They kind of
We,
reduced the variance by giving you a million of them.
I was gonna say, I mean, like I don't hate that approach to it, which is I think that what's backbreaking about like Dune Imperium intrigue cards is it's like you might only get like 5 or 6 in the game, like in the whole game.
Right.
And like if 5 of them suck, like
Yeah,
if
versus you get like 20 of them and maybe 10 of them are good, 10 of them are bad. Well, what if instead 11 of them were good and 9 of them were bad? It's not that much
yeah,
different,
it's
right?
not a big deal. I think the issue I think you might have to just run the numbers and just get your sample size big enough on like what you have in a game. Obviously, this isn't something that works with Inish because like the Epic Tale cards are entirely different. But in like the system we see so often these days, like in Dwellings, Andromeda's Edge, TI, um, and
Dune Imperium.
Dune Imperium, um, I think it's just if you provide more of them to players, like way more of them, I think I don't hate it as much because like then you're always thinking like, oh man, well he's got something.
Right.
I don't know what he's got,
It does
but
clog
like
up the decision space. So
it
if
does,
you do
yeah,
it, I think it becomes a pretty major part of the game, right? And
yeah,
so you got to
man,
be prepared for that.
yeah. Actually, the thing about Dune Imperium is it's like it's quite tight when you don't have the cards in the game, and so that's why I don't like them in that game because like they can really mess up stuff.
Mm,
Um, in a big way. And even as somebody who has benefited from them in the past, it doesn't feel great when it's sort of like, oh, they can just do whatever. I've got like a hand of 3 cards that all have 5 swords. Like, what are they gonna do about that? There's nothing
right.
you can do. There's no counter spell. There's no like thing. There's no combination of cards they can play that's gonna be better than these 3 random cards I arbitrarily have in my hand. And so it's like it doesn't feel good even when you're like the one benefiting from that deck. And so to circle back to what Ben's talking about, I think as far as combat goes, I'm a little wary about that. Like that's why I'm wary about it. I don't want the kind of system where like it doesn't feel good to win because it doesn't feel like you earned it. And then it also doesn't feel good to lose because it doesn't feel like the guy who beat you earned it from your perspective either. It's kind of like, well, he just had that random card that won it for him or her. It's just that doesn't feel great. I mean, it honestly feels worse than if somebody just beat you with a dice roll, because then it's like, oh yeah, you just like rolled better than me. That's fine. It's almost more
Right.
insulting if somebody drew like the exact card they needed out of a deck of like 200 cards and like they just had it. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, but
Me, when I draw my Dune Imperium action card,
no,
oh,
for
I
for
got a
for
rock. But
no, Blake is the master of that in Huang. It's like, oh, you wanna cause unrest in
oh
Blake's
yeah, yeah. I have
country.
a handful of exactly what you don't want me to have. Good luck.
It's like Blake just like spends like 5 reds on a dime and then like refills and it's 5 yellows. And it's just like
Yeah, that has really been the trend for like probably the last three Huang games. I always seem to have the damn
I'm
hand.
horrified of like ever challenging Blake and Huang because I'm just like, oh, he'll have it. But anyway, the other thing I was gonna bring up is yeah, I when we were talking about your game idea, Ben, one thing I didn't talk to you about since is something one thing I'm thinking about regarding that kind of combat system, which is to say, like, how do you make like a pure card deterministic card system feel exciting? And it's not that it can't be done. And moreover, it has been done. Like BattleCon has done it, at the very least. And BattleCon did it by, I think, having a space for movement where there's like a third dimension to combat. More than just like, am I hitting you or not hitting you or blocking or not blocking? There's also this movement and like distance
Right.
aspect
And
to it.
and not in the terms of like a lot of area control games are where you move into a hex and now
No,
you're going to
no.
have a combat and in the combat, you're staying in the hex.
And
BattleCon is like you're actually moving around during the combat.
BattleCon is great fun. However, BattleCon is too in depth for an area control game. That is, the combat is just too a little too complicated
Yeah,
for.
that's the whole meat and potatoes with
Yeah,
the
it's
Right.
a little too complicated
Yeah,
to be
that's
the
the whole
resolution
thing.
system. But I was thinking about like ways you could have like a third dimension or like something else going on to sort of spice it up. And the idea that I had was that you have cards that are multi-use and you decide how they're used after they've been played face up.
huh.
Um,
Hmm.
so suppose you have a card that's like an attack, but at the bottom it's like, okay, that's just hypothetically. So the top of the
Yeah.
card is like an attack, the bottom of the card is like half of a defense. And so like if you played two cards that are half a defense, they don't even have to both be attacks. In response to like the opponent seeing what the opponent is doing, you could like combine them to be one defense card. And so
Huh.
there's this ability to sort of like respond, but only in like a sort of limited way. Otherwise, you're going to have this AP nightmare. And so like maybe there's this world where you have the ability to be like this mostly deterministic system, but there's a little bit of wiggle room once the cards are on the table, you know?
I actually had the exact same idea and I
Oh,
started
really?
prototyping it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Except not like a half of a defend. The thing that didn't work about it was I basically was it was like rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock.
yeah.
It's like the idea of this five-way rock, paper, scissors, and you had and like what I was doing was I had one symbol on top and one symbol on bottom, and then you'd be able to like flip it in response to whatever somebody else did. So, oh, you've got dodge, defend, attack, insult, something else. And it was like, oh yeah. And then it just ended up being and like the reason that nobody plays that five-way version of rock, paper, scissors is that it's too complicated. Like it ends up being too many steps to consider. Like, yeah, like you said, it ends up being an AP nightmare. Like you just can't think of that many possibilities. You need like a whole chart to be like, well, dodge beats defend and this beats this and this. And like,
That's kind of why I was thinking half of a second option. It's like primarily one card, but it's only half of a second card. That way, it's not like, oh, I can now flip over everything every which way. It's just like, oh, well, in an emergency, I could like do something.
yeah,
Because
I
it's
like
like,
that idea. Yeah.
I think
uh,
that could work nicely in an asymmetric card game.
well, I think this is going to be asymmetric, or I think it was going to
Yeah, that
be.
was the idea I had. Yeah. I'm not sure how like again,
I mean
and this
like
I got
in the
stumped.
vein of like Netrunner, right? Where
Oh,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
where the two sides dueling are uh, very, very different in what they're trying to accomplish. Because to me, and the reason I say this, to me, when I hear what y'all are describing, well, who flips first? Does the second person get the flip? Right? Like to me, the thing that you're solving best with that sort of system is trying to reduce the benefit of like a first player advantage, right? Because that first player, and in this case, I guess it's a second player advantage, right? If someone has to play out a card, the second player, then gets to see the card, right, to respond.
Mhm.
okay, well now the first player gets to have their little shot as well. But you can't keep going like that indefinitely. It's going to be too much. And
No,
so that's why
that
I went to
yeah,
the idea of like an
yeah.
asymmetric.
Yeah, it's hard. It's like you want to make a combat system that's interesting and is going to be engaging for both players that are involved in the combat, both before and after, like thinking about what they're going to do and the act of doing it. And there have to be some stakes, but then it also can't be too random. It can't be too deterministic. It can't
Right.
be, it can't take too
Like
long.
I'll know a
it,
good combat system when I see one. I can say
Yeah,
that
it's
much.
like
yeah.
it ain't easy out here making the perfect brew. I mean, we're all amateur game deving these various combat systems for area control games, and it's like, damn, Komet really did a good job, As we
Right.
say,
Yeah.
it's they really did a good job.
Yeah, I mean, that's like I'm trying. It's yeah. I had the same problem where it's like, well, how do I make it so that we can play these cards in a way that's interesting? Like, how do you get it so that you can think about somebody else's turn and what they might do? Because that's like where the interesting, like some of the interesting part is. And maybe that's part of the problem with some dice chucky kind of systems is it sort of says, to hell with that. You did all the thinking already. Now we'll just see what happened. That's kind of like part of the point of that is, well, no thinking anymore. We're done with that. You've like here's the resolution. And I think it's hard to make a system that is quick, that doesn't involve dice. Like I've been trying to think of like how do you make a resolution system that is quick without it being somewhat random, you know? And it's like if it's a deterministic system, if it is card playing, and there is like like the problem I had with that with the rock, paper, scissors, it's like, well, maybe sometimes the best move is to just like play these almost completely randomly and just not even think about what your other opponent is doing and don't get in your head about it.
It's
Because you could just,
it's the fractal problem.
yeah, it's like maybe I'll just throw rock, like because it doesn't matter. Like, or maybe I'll just randomly decide what I'm doing because that's better than what I can be trying to do to like wig out the other opponent?
Right.
Hmm.
Then they're never in my head.
Right.
Yeah, it is tough. I think it's I mean, part of the beauty of the Forbidden Stars combat system is that like the decks are so different. And the decks aren't just so different, but like the decks, like the things that you're going to upgrade into in your deck in Forbidden Stars to deal with certain other decks are also different. Like we had that game last time, Blake, where like I had that really specific counter pick to that Tyranid card, remember? Like
Yes.
really
And
early.
then played it when I played my Tyranid card. Yeah,
And
you
like I
you had
only
my
put that
number.
card in the deck thinking that you'd take that card, and in fact it was a liability that I had that card after that combat. But
Oh yeah, it totally screwed you.
that sort of thing is so cool when it comes together. And I don't know if we have another game like that, um, period, that we played where like there's like this really specific sort of counter picking and like thinking about the other person's deck building. And maybe you just give up. Like maybe Forbidden Stars just like you just maybe it's not even worth chasing that. You know what I mean? I think it maybe because it's like there's so many things that come together to make that work, and it might be the case that we all just making our own versions of the Komet combat, you know, and
Hmm.
and part of the Komet thing is like it's not rock paper scissors, it's just rock and paper. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, are you trying to defend in this combat and just like keep your dudes and you already know you're going to lose, or are you going to win? I mean, maybe a Komet is even just scissor versus scissor, you know?
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes it is just I give me the more swords.
Yeah.
And there's like you can build into perhaps well, I'm gonna do 7 blood to you or something, and it's like, well, and now everybody's dead and you don't win.
Yeah, it might.
But it's very rare. Like
Yeah.
that's like you kind of have to spec into it.
Yeah,
Right.
I guess my point is that maybe it's kind of like a flawed board game design decision to be thinking about rock paper scissors to begin with. I guess is my point. The reason why it kind of makes sense of Forbidden Stars is because these decks are so far from rock, paper, scissors. Like it's it's like in some if you really abstracted it, like maybe there's a tiny bit of that there, but they're just like the decks are so different that it's not like that anymore. And there might be
Mhm.
some cards that can fight against other cards, but it's going to be situational depending on all these other factors. And so maybe trying to go in that direction is just kind of like a bad idea. Like we saw it kind of go wrong with Fractal. And so
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
it is just
yeah.
better. I'm like now as I'm saying it, I'm thinking like maybe it's just better to be like just scissor all day, baby, and like it just scissors all the way down, and have it be
Oh,
like scissors plus like some like utility stuff you can do, and like no, don't worry about my. I don't think the blocking and the dodging. Maybe that sort of stuff is like maybe that sort of stuff really only comes to life when you have something like BattleCon, when you have that like extra dimension of um the space and the movement.
Yeah.
right.
I I was actually reading an article about rock, paper, scissors when I was like doing this whole thing.
You had
And it
enough
was
on the
like,
tab.
yeah, one of the things they mentioned was like part of the whole point about the rock, paper, scissors lizard Spock was like to avoid ties as much. It's like the whole point like that's in theory, but the article is making the point like the the ties are kind of part of the point of rock, paper, scissors. It's not a bug, it's a feature. Like part of it is that you are able to resolve rock, paper, scissors so quickly that it doesn't matter that you're tying because you're able to just like it's like, oh, we tied. Okay, let's go again.
Right. It
Okay, we
builds
tied
the
again.
tension when you tie, no?
Yeah, it builds the tension. You know, it's actually like it's a part of the game, and it puts you into the headspace of like trying to wig out your opponent as well. Of like, well, he went rock last time and we tied. Are we gonna go? Is he gonna go rock again? You know?
BattleCon had a
Um,
system for that too. It had clashing. You remember
yeah,
Oh
that?
yeah, the clashes are cool in BattleCon. Yeah, it is very much just a go again type of thing.
You
Oh, you
keep
tied?
like
You got to play another card.
you keep like the one half of your attack, and then you like play a new attack, and then you check all the other stuff, and you fight, and you have like another conflict. But then it's like, oh God, I can't afford to be in the middle of this clash. I got to dodge now, and then you
Right.
both dodge past each other or something, and
Yeah, like his hurricane kick matched my typhoon punch. I'm
yeah,
gonna hit him with the hurricane slam.
yeah.
Oh no, the typhoon tumble.
Yeah, that's basically what it is. I mean, that I kind of like that where it's like if you do have the scissors versus scissors clash, it's like, oh, now it's escalating. It's not resetting. It's like
Right.
we're escalating the stakes even further. It's kind of
Yeah.
fun. I don't know how good it is for game balance, but um it's kind of fun from an exciting perspective. And maybe a deterministic game system needs that because I guess it's like
yeah.
when you don't have dice, it doesn't have that kind of same visceral excitement of just like throwing a bunch of dice. And that's fine. Obviously, I'm a proponent of it anyway, but the maybe having something like that where you have like the clash mechanic is
Well,
like
and
how you
like
get around that.
combat should be exciting, right? I mean,
It
that's
should be.
another
It
thing.
should be.
Yeah, that's like part of the point is it should feel like a fight. And that's something that dice do well. I will continue to shill for big dice.
Damn.
Like I'm the resident dice chucker. Yeah, like I think that it's a good thing about that where it's like, well, it's like gambling. I mean, it's exciting. It's like, oh, well, like this is gonna like, you keep happen like this stuff keeps happening, and that's what
Yeah.
ideally combat should be um feeling that way. And if it's not, I don't know, there's something, it should feel and otherwise it should feel like strategic, I guess. It depends on the kind of combat you're emulating. If it's if it's literally like a fight between two dudes and explosions are happening, maybe dice are what's good. But if it's like armies, marching against each other, maybe you want it to feel more strategic.
Right. One thing I really like with a combat system is the ability to like I like the ability to make the decision to fight somewhere knowing that that fight might look very different by the time the fight happens, right? So disconnecting the actual uh, battle from the triggering of that combat. So, for example, with something like with something like Forbidden Stars, it would be because you have these hidden orders, and then we're going to resolve all the hidden orders, and they might start a battle. You don't necessarily know what you're going to be fighting, right? Someone could reinforce their area or what have you, and you have some ways around that. Or a game like Twilight Imperium or even Eclipse do that by using ship pinning, right? So you might pin some ships down. Well, the battle hasn't started yet. They can still move out. They only have to leave as many ships as you have, right? So the battle could really change before you actually go to the resolution. I think that's cool because you could have a system that even whether it's random or has a deterministic element to it, even if it's random, you probably have a pretty good idea of who's going to win. Well, now all of a sudden the landscape's changing, and so you have to consider more things when you're setting up these battles, and I think that's a fun space.
Well, I know that I don't mind that myself, although I know that some people probably really hate the idea that you'd have to make an imperfect information decision about starting the combat. Um, so that's probably one of those things that's like you either like it or don't like it.
Right. Yeah, I'm
Um, but
into it.
but if you like it, then you like it. So, well, we're probably drawing to the close of this conversation for now, although I'm sure we could probably go on about combat systems and area control for hours and hours and on end off camera. But in the meantime, I think we're gonna hopefully go back to a regularly scheduled episode with some kind of review content next time.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think it's probably going to be, are we going to do Dwellings in Andromeda's Edge next time or something like that, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
Or could be.
I haven't got to play Andromeda's Edge yet, so I'm excited to give that a play when we get to it.
We do have Dune this weekend as well, so
Yeah, we got Dune.
the
It's true.
Dunage. We, all right. Well, thanks for listening. I'll see you guys next time.
See ya.
Bye.